Good morning and welcome to this Euractiv online event, which is kindly supported by PKE, the Polish Electricity Association. My name is Frédéric Simon, I'm the Energy and Environment Editor of Euractiv, and I will have the pleasure of moderating today's event titled Meeting the New 2030 Climate Targets, How Do We Get There? As you all probably know, the European Commission has tabled new climate targets back in September, making the case for a 55% reduction in emissions by 2030 compared with 1990 levels. The question now, obviously, is how do we get there? What measures are going to be necessary in order to reach those targets? And what does this mean for the electricity sector, which is today still responsible for a big share of emissions in Europe, and especially in countries like Poland, which are heavily reliant on coal? Now, to discuss those issues today, I have the pleasure of welcoming a high-level panel of speakers. But before I introduce them to you, we're going to hear first from Poland's Minister of Climate and Environment, Michał Kurtyka, who has prepared a video statement for this event. Michał Kurtyka, over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the debate Meeting the New 2030 Emissions Targets. How do we get there? A discussion about one of the most important aspects of the European Union's future. After more than 7 months spent fighting COVID-19, we know that it has an enormous impact on the global economy, including on the economy of the European Union. The pandemic will leave an indelible mark on our future, changing the way people live and do businesses. It will also have a significant impact on the policies of individual countries and the EU as a whole. We know this unprecedented situation requires us to take extraordinary measures. And credibility in the implementation of climate policy, a fair distribution of costs and benefits, the launching of grassroots initiatives, including technological innovations, are key challenges in solving climate problems in these unprecedented times. The proposal for a new EU climate objective for 2030 and the climate neutrality target make the EU's climate policy more ambitious than before. This is a crucial aspect of our action in the context of the long-term pursuit of the collective climate neutrality goal. In light of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and its economic impact, the Commission's proposal on the 2030 target, as well as its effects on the Member States, requires in-depth analysis. We are lacking this information as we do not know what an increased target means for Member States, for regions, for sectors. In this context, how can we ensure a just and sustainable transition? We do not want to enforce sweeping radical changes without the full view of the consequences. We rather want to introduce changes in a gradual, systematic manner while taking into account their impact on society as a whole. We want to jump on this bandwagon, be a part of the change. In fact, in Poland, we are already doing a lot in this regard. However, we need to take into account the existing structure of the national energy system and the share of individual energy sources. Poland advocates for a just transition that takes into account the particular nature of our economy and the needs of our coal regions. The green transition cannot see people and societies left behind. Transition goals must be not only ambitious, but above all realistic and socially acceptable, and the effects of the reforms must not burden the poorest. The current crisis highlights the importance of our demands to ensure a just transition. At the same time, maintaining the global competitiveness of the EU economy should remain one of our fundamental objectives. We should aim for a green, but also thriving EU. We need to choose anti-crisis measures in such a way as to protect the climate and the environment without damaging the economy while saving our jobs. During this crisis, it's crucial to have the flexibility to choose the path of transition that will enable the member states to achieve shared objectives while taking into account the protection of citizens and sectors of the economy which were most affected by the pandemic. Our top priority should be to avoid imposing additional burdens, especially on those with the least capacity to cope. If the EU wants to make climate policy a real and feasible goal, it needs to raise the issue of a fair distribution of commitments. It is the way to make sure that everyone is on board and no one is left behind. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us here today. I wish you a fruitful discussion, and I'm sure that the representatives of the European Commission and Parliament, the National Centre for Emissions Management, Polish Energy Association, will provide a well-balanced platform to discuss EU climate policy.
Right, that's an interesting statement we've just heard from Michel Kotiker. We'll have the opportunity, of course, to exchange views about it in a moment, but let me first introduce our panelists for today's discussion. With us today is Clara de la Torre, Deputy Director General at the European Commission's DG Klima, Morten Pedersen, Vice Chair of the European Parliament's Committee on Industry, Research and Energy, Robert Jeske from the Center for Climate and Energy Analysis in Poland, and Pavel Siosz, member of the Management Board of PKEE. Welcome to all of you, and thanks for joining us today. We'll start this virtual conference with some short opening statements from the speakers, and then we'll move on to a Q&A session that will also include questions from the audience. To ask a question, just click on the Ask button on Vimeo and put your question in writing. I'll try taking as many of them as possible. Morten, go ahead.
Thank you, Frederick. Can you hear me? I hope I'm coming through. Is the sound coming through?
Yes, we can.
Oh, that's great. Well, good morning, everybody. I hope you are safe and sound wherever you are. Greetings from Copenhagen. It's a great day in Copenhagen, but it would obviously be preferable to have had the opportunity to meet in real life, but that is not the situation right now. Thank you so much for this invitation. I think it's an extremely important topic. It's very timely that we discuss these important topics. And first of all, let me say I fully acknowledge what the minister was just saying, that we have real issues in the green transition, in ensuring that we have everybody on board, that we have all countries and regions on board in this very, very ambitious project. And if I could just start out somewhere else. I was in Madrid before Christmas last year for the climate summit, and it was absolutely evident that there was a total lack of leadership in these climate negotiations at that time. With the Americans withdrawing, we can hope that they're re-entering the Paris Agreement. Basically, it was up to the Europeans to lead the way in this green transition. And this is where I find the Green Deal such an inspiration, because it is really an ambitious, gigantic task and an ambitious project to ensure this green transition of entire economies and societies, and in the European case of an entire continent. And there are real issues, as the minister just pointed out, in ensuring that we have everybody on board. And obviously there are widely differing preconditions for achieving these targets, whether you're in Poland and are heavily coal dependent, or in the case of Denmark, we have a 70% ambition for 2030. We have a 70 climate target for 2030, and are working hard in order to try to get there, which is by no means easy, but we are really trying and we are really pushing. So let me make the first point that I think these targets are extremely important in terms of having ambitions. If we do not have targets, we do not know where we are steering and what we're striving for. So we need targets in order to be ambitious and in order to ensure these transitions. Then we need to have funding as well in place. And hearing and learning about yesterday's news with Poland and Hungary blocking the MFF, blocking the budget, is obviously not very helpful when talking about financing the green transition and ensuring that there's money on the table for a just transition mechanism, which is exactly aiming at ensuring funding for regions that would be heavily dependent on fossil, on coal, and ensuring that they can see a way through, that they can see a path through in this green transition. So we need money, we need a budget. So it's not very helpful for countries to block budget at this precise moment. So let me also make this point that it would be helpful for the green transition if we at least could get a budget through where we have just transition mechanisms in order to cater to these regions that are heavily exposed to or dependent on coal. And let me, and this should be my final words, Frederick, in this short introduction, that what we see in these years and times is obviously a very sharp fall in the prices on renewables, on onshore and offshore wind, and on solar, on PV installations. So just in terms of price signals, we see that market prices are plummeting on renewables. And at the same time, we're subsidizing heavily coal and fossil. So there's something wrong with the price mechanisms that we have at the moment. So I also think there's a point to be made in terms of saying that market signals, market prices are proving that renewables are also the right path to go. So let me end here my short introduction by saying that we need a budget. We need to listen to these price signals as well, and we need to show that there is a way through in this green transition, and that requires some solid and ambitious targets for 2030 as well. Let me wrap it up here. Thank you again for inviting me. I'm looking very much forward to the discussion. Thank you, Frederick.
Thank you, Morten. And let me now pass on the floor to Robert Jeske from the Center for Climate and Energy Analysis in Poland. Robert, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me too?
Yes, you're coming through fine. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Frederick, for the invitation. It's a privilege to take part in this discussion, and I think this is one of the ongoing debate on how we can get to the EU Green Deal in 2050. And the proposal from the Commission to increase the 2030 target to 55% and even discussion within the Parliament on 60% is one of the crucial stage to deliver net zero in 2050. And I think we all know where we're heading. But reaching this EU updated 2030 target will require for sure efforts across the entire economy, not just the ETS sectors like energy industry, but also non-ETS sectors like transport, building, and agriculture, which are very crucial, specific itself, and we should also not forget that their specificity and the specificity of the regions, because it's also matter. Of course, the increased emission target strengthened the emission trading scheme that could be pivotal to drive the further CO2 reduction in Europe. But at the same time, we should not forget about that the transferring EU target translates into different individual challenges for the EU member states, and what already Minister Kurtyka stated. This is also crucial in the COVID times. This global economic shock is also having widespread adverse effect in investments, and especially in the energy sector, that means PV or wind technology. And it is for sure, I agree with all the statements that are previously, that these targets and emission targets will need higher financial support. And this is an enormous burden for member states, especially the more dependent on higher share of fossil fuels in energy mix, higher greenhouse gas emission and energy intensity. And we should not forget that these low-income member states will have a higher burden than average in European Union. And therefore, we need to provide more adequate burden sharing mechanisms to drive this investment in regions and sector located in this less wealthy member state, and with lower level of capital that can input to the whole transition. I think this also focus on maybe not getting into technical level. I think there will be a room for discussing these things, but we should not forget on several issues in this respect. On the to modernize energy in these countries, but not only energy, electricity, but also the heating, which is quite crucial, and there's prices of heat, especially district heating and individual heating, is a crucial point in Polish perspective, where expenditure on heating is and electricity is quite crucial share of the expenditure for households. Therefore, we need a kind of safety mechanism, and I think in recently proposed by Poland founding the new Solidarity Fund, Energy Solidarity Fund, is a quite good direction to solve also the problem of not getting the society lagging behind, and to have everyone on board. Other things that another thing is, of course, discussed introducing the carbon border mechanism, which is also crucial in terms of delivering the adequate level of investment in EU and delivering the reduction worldwide, not only in the EU. And I will stop at the moment with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Let me turn now to Pavel Shosh from PKEE for the initial statement. Please go ahead, Pavel, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. At this moment, we are in the middle of discussion on how new 2030 climate targets would be set as a milestone to deliver climate neutrality of the EU by 2050. These policies will definitely and without doubt change the landscape of business activities of most of the EU economies and the way how the biggest utilities will operate in the coming years. The PGE Capital Group, as the member of the Polish Electricity Association, wants to be an active player in the Polish energy transition. 1 month ago, we announced a very important new strategy. Our new strategy assumes that by 2030, we will have 50% of renewables in our portfolio, and CO2 emissions will be reduced by 85%. Alongside with the common objective, by 2050, PGE intends to achieve climate neutrality and offer to its customers 100% green energy. However, the expected increased greenhouse gas reduction target for 2030 to at least 55% will be a huge challenge for the whole European Union, and all sectors of the EU economy. The Commission's impact assessment therefore, the main investment stream should be dedicated to the energy transition. This is why the December European Council conclusions should provide a clear guidance for the forthcoming EU ETS revision. What should be directly stated by the European Council is that proportionally to the new commitments, the ETS directive review in 2021 has to increase the number of allowances dedicated to the modernization fund and the share of allowances dedicated to the solidarity pool to effectively address the challenges ahead. To sum up, the overall impact of the 2030 target on the sectoral measures depends on the enabling framework. We strongly believe that any distributional effects of the new target should be addressed with the forthcoming EU ETS revision. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavel Siosz. Let me try again with Clara de la Torre. Do we have a connection with Clara de la Torre? Can you hear us now or not?
Yes, I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
Ah, brilliant. So you have the privilege of closing the round of introductory statements instead of opening it. That it's almost as good.
Okay, thank you very much.
Go ahead, Clara.
Thank you very much, Frederic. Thank you very much, Euractiv, for inviting us. And apologies for this problem in connection. I heard very little at the beginning, and okay, I'm sure the questions will be raised. We will discuss the more pertinent questions following your opening statements. So I think by now we all know that the objective of the Green Deal is putting the European Union in a climate neutrality situation in 2050 without leaving anyone behind. That's our main direction. In the meantime, we had this crisis. This crisis is not changing the direction that we are having. It is reinforcing the role of the Green Deal as a growth strategy to reach neutrality in 2050. But very rightly, today's session is devoted mainly to 2030 objectives, because we realized it's not that we realized, deep analysis show that if we don't raise ambition for 2030, we will not reach the target on 2050. And this is why the Commission presented what I'm sure has been mentioned several times by your introduction and the previous speakers. We have raised these objectives. There is one thing I would like that we remind ourselves is that decoupling growth from the increase of emissions is not a new thing for the European Union, because as we know from 1990, we have grown, the economy has grown by 62%, and we have diminished emissions by 25%. So this is a real life proof that we can grow, that there is prosperity, and at the same time, we can reduce emissions. We are confident, following the in-depth analysis that we have done, that we can reach this minus 55%. I'll get there. I'm a bit nervous about all these problems of connections. 55% decrease in emissions by 2030. It is technologically possible, and from the economic point of view, it does make sense. It is not easy. It is a transformative evolution, and can be disruptive in some sectors. Also, we are working on mitigation, of course, reducing the emissions, but also at the same time, we have to be working on adaptation, on addressing the harm that climate change has already made and produced, and that will anyhow continue producing. This is why we're working in an adaptation strategy that will be issued beginning of next year. In this session, we are discussing in particular about energy, and it is clear that the transformation of the energy sector is at the core of this transformation. And we know that we will have to in our analysis, we see that the renewables should account to around 65% of power generation by 2030, if we want to reach the 55% target. There is a lot of mitigation potential in buildings. We know that 75% of our stock of buildings is inefficient, and therefore the residential sector could lower emissions by more than 60% in 2030 compared to 2015. Transport and industry will have to contribute to this ambition. And we know that for technological reasons, they have a more limited short-term potential for cost efficiently reduce the emissions. And therefore, these sectors are expected to reduce by 15-20% of emissions by 2015. Let us not forget either the non-CO2 emissions that play also an important role in the climate neutrality target. And the non-CO2 emissions coming, for example, from agriculture mainly, they contribute to a reduction of 30% compared with 2015 targets. Of course, there are a number of policy tools that have to be used. Of course, there is a huge amount of investment that is needed for this transformation, and we can discuss about that later if you want. There is the carbon pricing, and I was hearing the last speaker. I could hear the last speaker, and we have all, of course, read and taken good note of the Polish proposals about the ETS reforms. So we are looking at ETS in its current functioning, but as well considering broadening the scope of its application to several other sectors, maritime, but as well we are considering road transport and buildings. In the regulation, we have as well the effort sharing regulation, which takes very carefully account of the different situations of the different member states. We have the land use and land change of use of land regulation. We have the CO2 standards for cars, the renewables directive, of course, and the energy efficiency directive. Last message as an introduction is that we are happy to see that other important parts of the world are following in that undertaking, and we have seen the announcements of China becoming carbon neutral by 2060, South Africa climate neutrality by 2050, and not least Japan with climate neutrality also announced for 2050. I will stop there for the introductory remarks, and apologies for all these problems of connection.
Thank you, Clara. We can now move on to the Q&A session. And let me start with this. In his introduction, Michel Cortica said further analysis was needed to evaluate the impact of the 2030 climate target on the Polish economy. Now, at the last EU summit in October, the EU heads of states invited the Commission to conduct in-depth consultations with the member states about this, about the impact at the national level. So, Clara de la Torre, can you tell us, have those consultations taken place, and what was the conclusion?
Yes, indeed. There was, apart from the consultations, we will be doing more detailed analysis. I would not say apart. This, in addition to those consultations, I come back to them. We are going to do a detailed analysis of specific impacts when we will be looking at the different legislations I was mentioning. But yes, the consultations with member states, they were organized on request, and to my understanding, all member states, but 3 or 4, have asked to undertake these discussions, and they are taking place as we speak. So I cannot give you the conclusion. What I can tell you is that they are fruitful and in-depth discussions. They are being organized with high-level officials in the Commission. And yes, they are taking place. And my understanding of the 2 or 3 that have already taken place are very fruitful for both sides.
Pavel Stosh, maybe a comment from your side on the consultations. I know you're not in the government, but have you heard about the consultations that took place between the Polish government representatives and the European Commission, as was requested by the European Council in October? Have you heard anything about how those consultations went? Pavel, we cannot hear you. I think you need to unmute your microphone. There you go. We can hear you now. Go ahead.
Of course, I'm not at liberty to say in the name of our authorities, but I can say that in the December European Council, we as a Polish energy sector expect clear declaration in good support for our transition. I mean, especially dedicated additional allowances from Solidarity Pool and from Modernization Fund. We need special financing for our green transition and investments. For example, in offshore on Baltic Sea, but of course it's authorities level. So that's it.
So thanks, Pavel. Let me stay with you for a further question. I understand PKE has identified a funding gap in Poland to meet the 55% target in the Commission's 2030 plan. So 92 billion euros, if I understand correctly, that is the figure that the PKE has come up with in terms of the funding gap. How can this gap be filled? I understand you mentioned the ETS Modernization Fund and similar funding coming from the ETS. Would that be sufficient to fill the gap in your view, or is something else needed? Pavel Stosh, if you could maybe unmute yourself. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. As we already know, Brexit will result in a withdrawal of one of the highest auctioning pool of allowances, which translates into considerable reduction of the number of Modernization Fund allowances. The overall number of allowances dedicated to the EU ETS-based financial mechanism, such as the Modernization Fund and Solidarity Pool, depends on the total cap of allowances. So the conclusion is that PKE, the Polish energy sector, is expecting dedicated financing from modernization fund and from solidarity pool. So the reduction of CO2 emission in 2030 to 55% is very ambitious target, but as you know, Polish state's company which belong to our electricity sector announced very ambitious strategies, and our strategies are according to those ambitious targets.
Thank you, Pavel. Let me turn to Robert Jeske now with maybe your analysis of the funding gap that was identified by PKE. What is your assessment? Do you believe this funding gap can indeed be filled with the funding mechanisms under the ETS, or do you see other possibilities, for example, private funding? We know there's reforms going on about the sustainable finance taxonomy, for example, which should help bring additional private finance for the energy transition in European countries, including Poland. So what is your assessment? Is it the ETS financing mechanisms which should fill that gap, or do you see other mechanisms as well?
Okay, very, very interesting question, and I think that every source of money is needed in this exercise. I mean, getting to the net zero in 2050, because we should not forget that this 2030, as already was said, this is part of the whole process we are getting in 2050, and increasing the target for 2030 is a crucial step, as I said, in investments that will try to deliver the reduction emission over 2030 as well. So I think that if we stick to the ETS, and the ETS is the main driver of the emission reduction, and the Commission is stating that the ETS and the carbon pricing is the crucial element of this story, we also, and this also deliver the incomes to the member states budget and EU budget, we should also focus on the supporting schemes delivered by the ETS, and the money flowed from the selling allowances, or divided the number of allowances on different mechanisms. But as well as you said, there are a lot of different funds, like Just Transition Fund, which is also part of the financial structure of the whole process. There is a taxonomy discussion, which I think is also crucial for pointing the differences in member states' starting points. And I mean, I recently also, as you also stated in your active articles, that there is a discussion to reduce the support coming to the gas, natural gas investment in Europe, which, of course, from the perspective of greenhouse gases, maybe it will be perceived as a unnecessary step if you invest in gas investment, because it's also fossil fuel. But at the same time, if you look in detail, that the European, I mean the Polish society and energy consumption in households in electricity and gas is 70%. That means that if you not invest in gas, at least partially until 2030, and I mean not investing in just gas investments like the installation only based on gas, but the new technology which is hydrogen ready, and in step by step delivering more production and technology hydrogen technology on the market, they can switch simply from natural or mixed gas to pure hydrogen. And I'm talking about this kind of investment. In this kind of thinking, I'm thinking is lacking in the discussion on taxonomy, which I think is a mistake, because you cannot deliver simple reduction in 2030 not looking on the gas sector in 2030 perspective, especially in the countries which are mainly based on coal, like Poland. So I think, answering your questions, every part of this mechanism, funding mechanism and investment is a crucial point, and also supporting the households with the increasing prices of energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Let me turn now to Morten Pedersen for a view from the European Parliament. Sticking with the issue of funding and the funding gap that was identified by PKE for the energy transition in Poland, in the European Parliament just a few days ago, one of your fellow MEPs, Pierre Larrouturou, he did a hunger strike to draw attention about the lack of funding available for the energy transition, for health and other priorities. Do you share his analysis that there is indeed a lack of funding available for the energy transition and those priorities, Morten Pedersen?
So I won't be going on hunger strike anytime soon, even though I might have good use of it. But I say a precondition for getting to tackle these real issues is that we have a budget. Coming back to the initial point on the budget negotiations right now, or the stranded budget negotiations, I think we have real issues. Of course, and me and my political group in the European Parliament are in favor of increasing own resources to the EU, and are in favor of having a bigger budget, in part because we need to fund and finance this green transition. So we were critical of this agreement being struck, where you, for example, had some cuts to the just transition mechanism. So I fully acknowledge the need and the necessity of having funding for these difficult transitions taking place all over the world, all over Europe. And this obviously requires a budget of some sort. So let's agree on passing the budget. And me and my group, we were actually working for having an even larger budget, also in order to ensure this green transition. But having said that, I think that there is a point to be made, and it is important to emphasize that we need ambitious targets. And we can discuss and agree or disagree on 55 or 60%. Again, my country has a 70% target, which is extremely difficult to obtain. But I just have to emphasize, yes, we need funding, we need financing. We should agree on this budget, we should agree on own resources, but we should have ambitious targets in order to ensure that we push this green transition. Because if we do not have ambitious targets, my worry is that we will not get to where we want to be in order to ensure that Europe as a whole is climate neutral by 2050, and also pushing member states to doing the right thing on these accounts. Thank you.
Thanks, Morten Pedersen. Maybe let me ask you, Clara de la Torre, to react to what was said about the possibility of having a funding gap for several countries. I mean, we know that the energy transition will be a lot more difficult in countries like Poland and others as well to the east of the European Union, because they have so much coal currently in the system that the challenge for them is bigger. Has the Commission done this analysis, looking at the different countries and the challenges that they have? And have you identified as well something like a funding gap?
Yes, indeed, we have made estimations of how much, we have not done that per member state, but we have done estimations of how much is the funding gap that they will need to fill in overall in the European Union. Now, previous speakers have mentioned the sources whereby this investment gap can be funded. Indeed, we have the Just Transition Fund, we have the Modernization Fund in the context of the ETS, but let us not forget either that 10% of the ETS allowances are put aside precisely for solidarity purposes for those member states that have a lower income. And as Mr. Peterson was saying, the most important thing in our view is the Recovery and Resilience Facility in the context of the New Generation EU and the Multi-Annual Financial Framework. I mean, without that, we can. It's certainly not ETS alone that is going to be able to fund this financing up. That's for sure. You were rightly asking, Frederic, about the private, or asking or referring to the private, and this we know it is also, and we have learned that from previous crises, that it is only by joint investments that joint investment plans that we can succeed in the transformation. So from that perspective, we should not forget, for example, either the Innovation Fund, which is funded as well from ETS, and which is there precisely to deploy mature technologies which are going to help in this emission reduction adventure. But the most important is the once in a generation possibility of having this recovery plan and the reinforced multi-annual financial framework. Without that, we will not succeed. And we will deceive our citizens, and we will not get the transition we need.
Thanks, Clara de la Torre. I have a question for you coming from the audience. It's coming from Anna Gambo from Carbon Pulse. She's asking you to comment about the possible expansion of the ETS to buildings and vehicles. We know on vehicles, Frans Timmermans has expressed his views publicly. He does believe there is potentially a regressive aspect to integrating road transport into the ETS. We saw that in France, for example, with the Yellow Vest movement, that the increase that this can cause on fuel prices can cause some social upheavals. What are your own views about the expansion of the ETS on road transport potentially, but also on buildings?
Indeed, these are two fields in which it is a complex. It's complex because of the fragmentation, let us say, of actors which are therein, and indeed in both sectors there is a very important distributional aspect. Indeed, the same goes for buildings. And then very often the lower income families are those that are living in buildings that are less energy efficient. They pay a higher energy bill, but I acknowledge as well that if they want to change this efficiency in their heating and cooling, they will need to have investments that they cannot afford. So we have to find the mechanisms. The renovation wave that we have launched is one of them, but not only. So we are, to come back to the road transport. To road transport, we are doing impact assessment for the different for the overall ETS, but to see how this ETS can be shaped, and how do we address the right, of course, the concerns of Mr. Timmermans about the distributional aspects. Let us not forget that in parallel to ETS, we have, when we are referring to road transport, we have to embrace the wave of electrification. And we know that fortunately, it's far from being enough, but fortunately, the sales of electric vehicles has increased a little bit more than expected, and the technologies are being, so we cannot just see the decarbonization of a sector from a single angle, which would be ETS. We have to couple that with the OEMs investing more in new technologies and then putting in the market cleaner cars, and not least, the upgrade of the infrastructure for charging, whether it's an electricity or hydrogen. So it's the three things that have to be taken together. And in the impact assessment that we are doing now, these issues will be addressed.
Thank you, Clara de la Torre. Let me ask the same question to Morten Pedersen now. The idea of extending the ETS to buildings and potentially road transport as well. Does that sound like a good idea in your view?
So I think I can echo what some of the points just made by Clara, because obviously we have to study this in terms of distributional impact by doing so. I think there are good arguments in doing so, but I think we have to be very much aware of the distributional effects on this, and also I think there's also a point to be made in terms of in the case of buildings, that we would at the same time want to also ensure that we have specific measures in place in terms of upgrading the renovation of buildings. I mean, with the renovation wave on the table within the Green Deal, I think there are tremendous perspectives in this. So there are also incentives, and should be incentives, in terms of renovating buildings. So that I think we will have to maintain and have to insist on having a focus on, even though we might end up including buildings within the ETS. So I'm just saying that we have to study this further, and we have to show that we also have the positive incentives in there when discussing renovation of buildings. So yes, I'm very open to this, but I think there are some studies that has to be done. There's further analysis to be done, ensuring we still have the right incentives in place, and at the same time being aware of the distributional impacts of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Morten. Maybe let me ask now Pavel Siosh about your views about the extension potentially of the ETS to buildings and road transport. I know in Poland there's a big program to electrify road transport. Actually, Poland is one of the countries which is taking sort of a leading position on this. Do you see this favorably, this idea of extending the ETS to road transport and buildings, or do you see there a risk of distributional effects which would affect the poorest segment of the population? Of course, and you need to. Yeah, go ahead.
Of course, Polish energy sector is the main contributor to emission reduction by 2030. But of course, such branches, such sectors like transport and buildings are also important in perspective reducing CO2 emission to reach indirect goal in 2030. We have many programs on the climate ministry levels. Now we have 3 programs which are supporting buying car in electric cars for businesses and for taxis for persons. So I think also we have many programs, innovation programs, strictly connected with green hydrogen. I think it's a future. In many cities, we have dedicated supports for electric cars, and contributions connected with, for example, parking fees for diesels. So it's very important part of reaching indirect goal connected with CO2 reduction in 2030. But of course, our sector, electricity sector, energy sector, is main contributor to emission reduction. Thank you.
Thanks, Pavel Siosz. And let me maybe stay with you, because you did mention the important contribution of the electricity sector in Poland to reducing emissions, and we all know coal is a big reason for that. The phase-out has started, but obviously the starting point that Poland has, of course, makes it quite challenging to phase out coal entirely. Now, looking at the 2030 targets that the Commission put on the table, the 55% reduction, have you calculated how much this means in terms of coal reduction in Poland? Have you do you have a figure to put on that?
Okay. Of course, we have 136 billion euros for all sectors. I mean, energy sector, transport, build. And our analyses are according to European Commission, I think.
Sorry, Pavel Siosz, because I think we lost the connection for a few seconds there. Could you maybe say, in a nutshell, the assessment that you made regarding the coal reduction that's needed in Poland by 2030 to meet the target that the Commission has put on the table?
Mm-hmm. The dates. Hello?
We couldn't hear your answer, so maybe you need to repeat very briefly what you said.
You're asking is concerning phase out of our installations, yes? Because I had problems with connection.
That's the amount of coal that you see that needs to be taken out of the system by 2030 in order to meet the Commission's proposed target of a 55% reduction in greenhouse gas emission. How much does that translate in terms of coal reduction in Poland?
Those are our businesses' decisions. Of course, this is authorities level. We know details. I'm not at liberty to say now when exactly, for example, which installations will be closed, but it must be strictly correlated with building new investment with RES, because our most important role is give the stability and secure energy system for Poland. So till 2030, the most important hard coal and lignite installations will be still open.
Thank you, Badal for clarifying. So if I understand correctly, there needs to be a stepwise approach. Every bit of coal that's taken offline needs to be replaced, and that obviously is not yet clear what it can be replaced with. Robert Jeske, maybe from your point of view, have you looked at the implications for the electricity sector in particular in Poland when it comes to meeting the 2030 targets? Have you made an evaluation of how much coal reduction that means, and maybe you've made also calculations about the costs that are implied?
Yes, indeed, we did a couple of months ago one of the analysis of the impact of the increasing the target up to 50% or 55%, and it was before the introduction of the impact assessment by the Commission. And according to our analysis, which was the first one, I think, on the market, showing the prices in ETS in 2030, which I think, reached 76 euros per allowances. Of course, the assumption was quite different than the European Commission shown us in the impact assessment. Basically, push most of the reduction necessity on ETS and increasing the target in ETS, I think, up to 65–67%. We divide the reduction efforts between ETS and non-ETS as the way as it is now, according to regulations. And one of the results, of course, was the reduction of the coal consumption or the solid fuels in European Union in electricity production. But we did it for the whole European Union, so I think, as far as I remember, it was reduced up to 30% in 2030, the share of these fuels. But if you allow me to get back to the question with the transport sector inclusion to the ETS, if I may, a couple of things stated, because I've got quite a different point of view than. So, because we also did. I mean, there are several analyses on the market and on the inclusion of, let's say, transport sector into the ETS, and it seems that it's not the best way going forward with the reduction of transport emission. We recently released the analysis showing the potential of the reduction in Poland, imposing the prices of carbon prices that will be up to 2030, 2050 in ETS. So not inclusion directly to the ETS, but maintaining the price impact of the ETS in transport sector. And I can say that in perspective for 2030, there won't be much reduction going on. We can say on the stabilization of the emission, and for sure you won't deliver the reduction up to the level of emission of 2005, even having in mind the progressing, reducing the cost of the technology in transport sector. And one of the crucial points in this, looking on the transport sector, is the cost of the electric vehicles and this technology. The more you invest and reduce the cost of batteries, I think this is the crucial point in delivering the huge reduction in transport sector. And just putting the transport sector in ETS, just switch the cost of the reduction for the whole ETS sectors, and mostly this reduction will occur and push the energy sector transformation, not the transport itself. So I think the cost will be switched to the energy sector at front, not to transport sector, because the people can the increase of the prices of fuel will be not as much high to deliver the reduction in transport itself. So I think we should not forget about the CO2 standards, which are the main driver at the moment of reduction of CO2 in transport. And the second thing, we should focus on deployment of this electrification technology in transport sector and reducing the cost of this technology. This is the let's say, the way to reduce emission in transport sector. That's why in Poland we invest a lot of money to deploy this technology on the market.
Thanks, Robert Jeske. And let me stay with you for another question. I understand you made an evaluation earlier this year about the impact that the coronavirus crisis has had on the energy transition in Poland and on the ability of Poland to meet the 2030 targets. Now, you argued at the time that it would make those targets more challenging to meet. Maybe you could expand a little bit on that. And also, is there not also a case to say the coronavirus crisis can also accelerate the transition? Because if some old industries which are no longer competitive, if they go out of business, of course, there's a big social impact associated to that, but it can also accelerate the transition, probably. What is your assessment of this?
For sure. I mean, everything you said is correct. I think both sides of the COVID-19 is a huge burden for all the economies, for Polish as well, and especially the more threat of the COVID and then the more cases of illness in the countries at the moment, the impact on the whole economy is bigger. But at the same time, if you look at the perspective of 2030 or longer, it's obvious that this is the opportunity to invest in new ways of and new ways of economy and new technologies and businesses, and this is also opportunity to leave behind the ones that are not delivering the vision of the future. But of course, this is a huge burden financially. So as you pointed out, this is the social aspect, and the social aspect is not only because of the investment or collapse of some businesses in Europe because of COVID-19, but also the if you look at the climate provisions and the vision on 2030, this is the increasing price of CO2, which at the same time gives a burden of existing households and businesses that already struggle with the COVID-19 situation. So this is both ways, and this both ways show you gives you the information that the COVID-19 is a situation where you have to put on the market much more money than previously to deliver the recovery and put it on the pathway to reduce the emission. Because after the COVID, we will leave the COVID behind, there will be the rebound effect. And of course, the Commission is familiar with that, and I think the most of the focus is also in this perspective to when we be in the pathway with the rebound effect, so the economy will increase, and if the economy increase, then the emission as well increase if we stick to the technology we already have in place. So that's why it's very important to put on the market the new technology, the clean technologies, and not get back on the emission we were before. And I think this also poses costs for the whole economy. I agree with the recovery plan and all the sources of the aid which we all in Europe need is a necessity.
Thank you, Robert Jeske. Let me try and get a reaction from Clara de la Torre now about the 2030 climate targets and the impact assessment that the European Commission made It drew, of course, there was one side of it which was the cost, but there was also a large part of it which was assessing the positive impacts on GDP. Could you maybe expand a little bit on that for us, and maybe focusing a bit on Poland and what are the potential positive impacts there for Poland? Clara de la Torre, if you can hear us, you can.
Okay.
You can start
Hopefully
speaking.
I
Yes.
can. You can hear me. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you. I'm really sorry. I don't know what happens today. It's the first time it happens to me in so many months. If I understand well, we want to discuss about the impact of this increased ambition on GDP. As I was saying, we have not done yet impacts per member states, and I must say that the overall impact on the GDP for 2030, the overall impact is limited. Is a growth of around half of 0.5%, not half, 0.5% of the GDP. The thing is that it's not the amount, is the way in which this increase of GDP will take place. It will be a more cost-efficient GDP production because it will embed it. We will be the externalities will be taken into account as they should, and we know that when externalities of the market are embedded in the pricing system, the allocation of resources is much more efficient. The sectoral distribution of this increase in GDP that will be differentiating. There will be sectors which are those that are more hydrocarbons anchored that are going to diminish for obvious reasons, but there will be sectors that will see an expansion. And there will be also new sectors and new services arising from this expansion in the GDP. But in quantitative terms, it's limited, 0.3, 0.5. In qualitative terms, that's the important thing. And the important thing as well is that if we didn't do this, we will be going into an even deeper crisis. That's also the important thing to remember. There are no gains in not addressing climate change.
Thank you, Clara de la Torre. Let me turn to Morten Pedersen, maybe for a view from the European Parliament when it comes to assessing the impact of on GDP of the 2030 climate goals. The Commission did its own impact assessment. It's several hundred pages long. The European Parliament voted to increase the target to 60% reduction by 2030, so up from the 55% that the Commission put on the table. Does that mean that in the European Parliament you have a more optimistic view of the GDP impact of increasing the EU's climate goals?
Well, you could say that we are more ambitious in terms of targets and the necessity of having high and ambitious targets. But simultaneously, Parliament has been pushing for an increased budget, coming back to the point on the just transition mechanism. So I think that there is a correlation in this approach, saying that we need a budget, we need a bigger budget, partially in order to cater for these real issues and problems that we do face in terms of this transition. But I think it's important to say that in Parliament it's very widely felt, I'd say, that the elections we had a year ago were for a large part climate elections. I think this applies to more or less all over Europe, that we as politicians, as elected politicians, are really feeling how much of an issue and how big importance that the voters attach to these issues. And this is why you see Parliament coming out being more ambitious in terms of targets of climate ambitions that you would have, say, in Council or for that matter, in some member states. So Parliament would say, yes, we need high ambitions, but we also need a budget and a budgetary means in order to fulfill these ambitions. Thank you.
Morten Pedersen, thank you. I think we're reaching the end of this conference. I will quickly ask each one of you to say very quickly in a few words, what is the main message that you would like our viewers today to take home with them, the main idea you would like them to take home? Morten Pedersen, maybe you can start.
Sure, thank you, and thanks again for inviting me. I think this discussion is so important because we need to have everybody on board in this green transition. But and there are real issues in terms of distributional effects and things that we have to be aware of in this context. And here funding plays a role. But let me also say there is a way through, and has to be a way through. I mean, we can do this and should do this. So I think it's fair to say that from Parliament's side, you see Parliament being quite tough in terms of having high ambitions and pushing member states continuously to deliver on this. I think we have an issue on implementation that member states are not fulfilling their obligations. So I think you should look out for Parliament wanting to address these things and keep on pushing for having high and ambitious targets. We need this if we are to combat climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, and let me turn to Robert Jeske now. The main message you'd like our viewers to take home with them when it comes to what it takes to meet the 2030 targets in climate change.
Yeah, I think there's obvious that we are focusing on the climate change problem, and we want to deliver as much reduction as we can. And this is a crucial point, how much we can. It's not about the overall European economy, but also divided the targets into separate member states, which are at different starting points, different circumstances, different sectors, also condition, and different, let's say, costs which are delivered to these societies. And I think that the effective support of this transformation in the EU requires the coherent and adjusted the structure of the mechanisms that we got already in place, which mean at ETS and others. And its support should be fair and effective tool for reduction of the emission. And I think this is a crucial point to understand the circumstances everyone is in this pathway to deliver the net zero in 2050 and before the reduction necessary in 2030. Thanks. And thank you once again for the invitation. It was a pleasure.
Pavel Cioś, maybe a few concluding words from your end.
Yes, of course, the Polish energy sector is an active player in green transition according to new climate law. However, reaching new targets for 2030 is a huge effort. The reason is, of course, completely different starting point of Poland. It means our different energy mix, which is based on now, of course, on traditional fossil fuels like coal and lignite. So therefore, we need special dedicated support from EU funds and additional allowances from solidarity pool. We believe that in closing December European Council, very important for our sector decision will be taken. I mean especially revision of EU ETS system. We are expecting. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavel Siosz. And let me turn now to Clara de la Torre for a few brief concluding words from your end. Clara, if you can see me, if you can hear me, but you can see me, you know the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My last message would be is that addressing climate change is our main responsibility. Of this generation, those of us in life today, is our main responsibility. We have to address it with the fairness and solidarity principles that are well entrenched in the European Union. And we should also, at the same time, use the once-in-a-generation opportunity to use smartly to address climate change and to address overall the sustainability of our economy with the huge amount of resources that are being put on the table for the recovery plans. Let us seize this opportunity. Let us not miss this opportunity. We will not have a second one to address our responsibility, which is leaving a planet which is livable for future generations. Thank you very much, and apologies again for these inconveniences.
Thank you very much. I think this wraps up today's event. Big thank you to PKE for supporting this virtual event. Thank you as well to our panelists for your time, and as well to our viewers for following us. Apologies once again for the technical issues we had during this virtual event. We'll try and address those for the next time. If you liked this debate, we have many more coming up on Euractiv. Just check our website, events.euractiv.com, for more detail. And if you've missed the beginning of this event, you will soon be able to watch the video again on YouTube. So we hope to see you again. Until then, enjoy your day and stay safe. Bye for now.